You are live.
Okay, we're going to call the meeting for Reimagining Public Safety to order at this time. I'm going to ask our clerk to read the roll.
Somerville,
Here.
Baylor, Connor,
Aye.
Freeman, Fusco,
Aye.
Holland,
Aye.
Kamer,
Aye.
Lombardo, McKittrick,
Aye.
Malik,
Aye.
Mosley,
Aye.
Neal,
Here.
Amobian. Okay, we have all members present except for Baylor, Freeman, Lombardo, and Amobian.
Okay, thank you so much. Today, we want to have some conversations around the implementation of the Citizens Review Board. We also want to spend some time also talking about purchasing dash cams. So at this moment in time, what I would like to do is to actually turn it over to Emily, who can talk a little bit about the Citizens Review Board. As many of you know, that the conversation around Citizens Review Board is nothing new. We've been having these conversations probably over the past year. We saw conversations happening through the social justice task force. We also saw conversations and recommendations that came through Akron City Council's Reimagining Public Safety. So just asking Emily to kind of give us an update in terms of where we are, what models are we looking at, and what best practices are we also looking at from across the country.
Thank you, President. So my name's Emily Collins, and to give you a little context for my role, since April, I have been filling a new role with the city, which is called a strategic advisor to the mayor. It's a new role to the city, and upon my introduction to the city, the first thing that I started working on was implementation of the Racial Equity and Social Justice Task Force recommendations. And I, along with my colleague, Tamika Rose, who is steeped in the task force's work, we've been working with cabinet members to date on an implementation plan that's based on the task force's recommendations, which were provided to the city in full in February. The task force recommendations really do touch every aspect of the city's operations, and oftentimes require us to have fairly difficult conversations, not just about whether or how to implement a recommendation, but also how we think about and practice considering equitable outcomes as our primary objective in almost everything that we do. So within those conversations, and specifically with respect to the Criminal Justice Subcommittee recommendations that are not just in the final task force report, but also in the Q3 report, we've been looking at the idea of the Citizen Review Board in the framework that the Racial Equity and Social Justice Task Force provided, but with an even sharper focus lately in thinking about models that aren't just workable on paper, but practically in building trusting relationships between the public safety officers in Akron and the community. So within that realm, what we are leaning toward in our work for implementation is a citizen review board that would include a 7-person volunteer community board appointed by the president of council and the mayor. And these are the things that we're liking. So a 7-person volunteer community board that would oversee and hire a paid full-time inspector general and a paid full-time administrative assistant. And we'd be looking for them to review citizen complaints independently of internal affairs. We're interested in a board that also conducts analysis of patterns and trends in complaints, discipline, department activities, policies and procedures. And then the third major piece of this is that we're really interested in a model that facilitates two-way communication and interactions between police and citizens through engagement, education, and training. And we'd like all of those three components to end up in recommendations to the mayor, to city council, and the chief. And of course, reporting out to the community. There's always a question in these conversations about whether a board like this would have subpoena power, and we are inclined to say that no to that. But we are very open to feedback from council and the community on filling in those gaps, and we're looking forward to input. What I'll tell you as far as the models that we've looked at and best practices is that it is certainly true that communities throughout Ohio have these kind of review boards. Dayton and Toledo use an appeal framework. That isn't the way that we were thinking a review board would function, but we're certainly interested in hearing if that is a way that the community and council would like to go. Columbus uses a model where there are independent investigations. The analytical review that I was talking about is a component of Columbus's model. And they do a review of internal affairs investigations and recommendations on discipline. That model is one that's very strong in our minds. But we also are thinking about adding this component about two-way communication and interactions between police and citizens and building trust. And it seems like Cincinnati and New Orleans tend to have really strong models that do that well. And I caution you that those models aren't necessarily obvious within just the legislative framework as far as doing well on communication with the community, but practically they're doing quite well. So they do a great job in making sure that they're available for public speaking and training and education. So I think that's where we are. And again, we are very, very interested in feedback and are aware that, this is a moment where we can really think through the best model for Akron. And Mayor, if you want to add on to anything, I would invite you to do that.
Yeah, I thank you, Emily. I would only add that obviously this is a framework that is going to involve a lot of discussion, obviously with City Council and the community. So certainly open to seeing what works best on that review board and kind of going from there. Not really stuck on any details. And I know there's been some discussion about whether whether it's a charter change or whether it's legislative. I personally think that a legislative model works. I mean, obviously there are when it changes the charter, obviously it's a little more difficult to do that, but I think you can achieve those same goals on a legislative basis to be able to have that framework, but certainly open to those discussions. That's a preference. I also think there's a timeliness to it. I think being expeditious with this and getting it up and running and continuing to do that work, like I said, that is a preference. But like I said, this is the framework to start that conversation. I think a lot of those details to be filled in by obviously what the preference of council is and continuing those discussions, obviously with the community as we move forward. That's what I would add on those things and certainly listening to all of your input as we go forward.
Thank you, Mayor. So I think at this time we can open it up if council members have any comments or questions. Councilwoman Holland.
Thank you so much, Madam President. Ms. Collins, would you be so kind as to restate items 2 and 3 of the 3 points? I want to make sure that I clearly understood them.
Absolutely. And I apologize if I went so quickly through them that you didn't hear them, Nancy. So the first point was the oversight, right? So and the form of the potential review board. I think what you're referring to is the scope. So the first point of the scope is that the board would review citizen complaints independently of internal affairs. The second point is that we would really like to see a model that is regularly conducting analyses of patterns or trends in complaints, discipline and trends in discipline and trends in department activities. So that may include policies and procedures applicable to those trends that we would like recommendations on. And then the third point is that we would really like to see a model that facilitates communication. And the Racial Equity and Social Justice Task Force is very clear in asking for two-way communication throughout the task force report. So we'd like to see that in this review board as well. So that communication would hope, we're gearing for it to be a trust building exercise where interactions between public safety and the community would be enhanced.
Thank you. And if I may ask a follow-up question, the evaluation of trends, is it fair to say that this board would be looking at matters that had already been concluded so as to sidestep issues involving union protections, due process rights, that sort of thing? In other words, disciplinary matters that had been resolved and concluded, not matters that were actually contemporaneous or ongoing. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's a great question. The timing of it really does matter, and it matters because of our union contracts, right? So I think that is what we're leaning toward, exactly what you described. We're certainly willing to hear other ideas, but I think for the purpose of thinking through things, so that we have something that's workable quickly. Yeah, I think it would make sense to think about timing in the way that you suggest. I will say, this idea of auditing versus investigating is often brought up in this realm, and sometimes those terms I think are used interchangeably. So it's important for us to understand what is meant by investigation and what is meant by auditing or review. So as we're receiving your feedback and as we're receiving community feedback, distinguishing between those two words might make some sense.
So we're not presently talking about a combination or connection necessarily between the existing police auditor position and role and a prospective citizen review board. We are keeping these separate for this conversation.
Well, that's a good question. I'll tell you, in referring back to the Racial Equity and Social Justice Task Force report, the idea there is that the review board would actually, in many ways, oversee that police auditor position. So if we are talking about this inspector general, then it does appear to encompass that role. And Mayor, it looks like you want to.
Yeah, I just would add that I think it's very important for the board to hire this particular person. However that may be structured to work. I just think for its independence and its transparency that it needs to be free from a mayoral appointment to say it would change at some particular point on that side. And it's not to diminish any of the work that has been done. But I think for that true independence, I'm not in favor of anybody that would sit to be able to appoint that person. The board needs to hire them. Obviously, we would help with the framework of the HR part of it and just those things. But I think they need to be responsible to that board. And certainly, you can structure it in a way that is, our police chief and fire chief have like 4-year contracts or 4-year or 3 and 4 year. do it something in that way. So it has some continuity to it, and you can build some of that, I think, over time to be able to build in that newer position to be able to do it. So certainly as all of this works, there will be a number of suggestions that I think come in from the community and council as to what works best in finding that right framework. But yeah, I think for its independence, it should not be and could not be a mayoral appointment.
Thank you both.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Malik.
Thank you, President Somerville. Thank you, Ms. Collins, for the information. Thank you, Mayor Horgan. I'm glad that we're having this discussion. We have, as President Somerville mentioned, been having these discussions since 2020, and I know these discussions predate many of us as well. As we struggle to, make sure that we have proper mechanisms in place to have civilian oversight over our police department and proper accountability over our police department, there are three things that I've really seen as key in some of the research, both from the task force and from Reimagining Public Safety, and that's access and authority under city law to information. That's staffing and funding for oversight mechanisms, and that's independence, to the point the mayor just made, that no matter who is in what role, it's important that there be some insulation between the folks who are running a police department and the folks who are charged with, really critically looking at issues and trends and raising concerns, whether that's publicly or privately. And so, from my discussions, my understanding is that to do this right and to do this in a strong way, we will need to look at a charter change. And I'm happy to be corrected as we move forward with these discussions. But I know that last year I submitted legislation to the law department that to try to codify the role and responsibility of the auditor, and was told very clearly that really that changes would have to go through the charter amendment. And I think particularly to the point the mayor made about the auditor or the inspector general or whatever we're calling it being appointed by this board, the charter very clearly provides the mayor with the role and responsibility of hiring anyone who's not in the classified or civil service. And so to create an alternative mechanism, I really do believe would require a charter amendment. And then beyond that, I think it's also important just to get the community on board. We are in a moment right now where folks are divided. Not everyone sees these issues the same way. Folks are frustrated. And if we look at this, in 2020, Columbus put forward a charter amendment to establish this board and their inspector general's office after the protests around the killing of George Floyd. In 2021, Cleveland did the same thing with issue 24, which passed pretty resoundingly and established a really strong oversight mechanism that actually goes beyond anything we're talking about and actually levies discipline. So I think that for those reasons, I do believe we should really strongly consider doing a charter amendment. We don't have much time, right? Clearly, to get something on the ballot this November would require us to move quickly. But I think to the points about timeliness, we have a responsibility to do that. And we have been talking about this for many years. I think we want to do it in the right way, in a way that's effective. But Ms. Collins, I want to thank you for the information that you've shared and look forward to the discussion here and continuing in the days to come.
Thank you so much, Councilman. And I don't know if we have anyone on from law here that can speak to some of the things that Councilman Malik was talking about, legislation versus charter. Again, I think all of us, want to see this happen soon, but we want to make sure that we're doing it right. So even if we can get some information sent just in terms of legislation versus charter, and if we can accomplish, what we're trying to do through legislation so that we can be more timely, if someone can get us some information regarding that, that would be really helpful. Councilwoman Mosley. Oh, yes.
I had an opportunity to speak with Councilman Malik over the weekend, late last week. made some of those requests of the law department. So they are diligently working on that particular issue. And hopefully we can get some information to this body pretty quick.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Mosley?
Thank you. I do want us to keep in mind and be considerate whether this is a legislative change or if it becomes a charter amendment, that when we do comprise this board, mayor and council president, that we also keep in mind those individuals that we comprise this board of, making sure that we have community stakeholders on this board, making sure that we have mom and dads who have lost children to gun violence on this board, making sure that we have community activists on this board. I know in the past, when I look at list of board members across our city and across our county, you see the same people all the time. And I think we need to be a little more intentional about how we comprise this board, whether it's on the legislative side or on the charter side. Let's just keep in mind the community members who have been out here doing the work and those who have been impacted by the things that are going on in our community.
Okay. Thank you, Councilwoman. Are there any additional comments or questions at this time?
I would only add that and it's a great point, Councilwoman. I certainly agree and wholeheartedly agree about trying to get this right and do this right on that way. And so having a diverse board of a number of voices, and I know we've tried extremely hard over the last 3 or 4 years to be able to spread some of those appointments out in both the institute that we're trying to do, whether it's Leadership Akron, and you're right, we do see a lot of the same faces, and we do need to spread that out, but trying to go across the entire city and make sure wards are represented and people are represented that have that voice, and always looking for names and recommendations on those things that we have up there so we can get people on those boards too. So a good point. I just wanted to make sure that, we're also committed to do this right. And we may disagree at some point, whether it's legislative or charter. At the end of the day, we're going to have a framework that is right on that side too. It is the timeliness of it and how expeditious we can get this done so they can get up and running and work. And certainly willing to talk through both those conversations as we get through the language of whether it should be charter or legislative. So I'll sign off. I just appreciate the conversation. So thanks.
Thank you. Councilman Malik?
Thank you, President Somerville. I just wanted to lift up another one of the points that Ms. Collins mentioned, specifically about the importance of this, two-way communication. And particularly, I know we did have the police monitor in New Orleans come and speak with us in Reimagining Public Safety in 2020 and really talk about how that office really can be a bridge between law enforcement and community. And I know that's something that our police auditor, Phil Young, has, prized himself on, and, creating the vehicle safety inspection, which brings officers in contact with citizens and creates some of those things. But really, I think, in this moment when we're all focused on gun violence and public safety, where we've seen, tragic killings this weekend, we all have an opportunity to participate in conversations about safety, all 190,000 residents of the city of Akron, right? What would it look like if everyone got up in the morning thinking, what is one small thing that I'm doing to help create a safer community? And I think that, establishing a really strong body that has staff that can work with some of the staff in the administration, with council, we can help create something that creates those on-ramps for everyone in the community. So we're not just seeing the same old faces, but we're getting everyone plugged into those conversations so that we're working with police and we're exposing people to, to understand their role a little bit more as well. So I just want to, make that point as we move forward.
Thank you so much, Councilor Malik. We do have a few more minutes, so I wanted to also just open up the floor so that we can possibly have some conversations about dash cams. Again, this is another recommendation that was in the social justice task force recommendations. And I see that we have Chief Milet. Are you able to talk just a little bit about dash cams, Chief?
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, Council, Madam President, Mayor Horrigan. Dash cams and body cams are two different platforms. Each give a distinctive view of what is occurring in the presence of a police officer. Wherever the officer goes, the body camera goes and is able to capture information. But as we often see, when a body cam gets turned on inside the car, oftentimes you're just seeing the steering wheel. Where the dash cam will give a view out in front of the car. And there's some models where you actually have cameras on the side of the car and behind the car, as well as in the prisoner compartment. Based on a conversation we had yesterday, I think there was agreement to move forward with scoping this out. Captain McCosey is working hard to get numbers on cost and number of cars that it would take to get our fleet up to full implementation of the in-car camera program. And I'm hoping that we'll have some preliminary numbers by the end of this week. I think it's a great tool. Quite frankly, I was a little shocked that we didn't have it. But I know this department historically has had them, but they were very antiquated systems. And I believe when the city adopted the body cam program, which again, kudos to the city of Akron for doing it, the cost, I think, was prohibitive to have both systems. So now that we are here having this conversation, and I know the Summit County Black elected officials sent a letter to Governor DeWine asking for ARPA funding to help us fund this program. I think it's another great thing. So I am very, very for it, and I think that it will benefit our officers and the community.
Chief, thank you so much. At this time, do we have any comments or questions from any council members regarding dash cams? Okay, seeing and hearing none, at this time, I see Councilman Kamer.
Thank you, Madam President. It took me a few minutes to raise my hand. Dash cameras, I do see we have a resolution coming in today, and I do support that. I was on the body worn camera committee when that first came out as public safety chair. And I know in the beginning, we had several companies that reached out to us, and we were able to experience the different body cameras. And I'm hoping by this getting press and us having this discussion, that these companies out there will probably reach out to the city, and hopefully we can have some pilot programs from different companies. I understand moving forward that we are trying to get funding for these dash cameras, but I'm asking us as a body to try our best locally as soon as possible to at least find the funding to, even if it's outfitting 12 cruisers or 20 cruisers, we have the money and we need to find it. It's about making sure the safety of our citizens are there, and then also our officers, obviously. So I support dash cameras, and I'm just asking this body to, and I'll support Councilwoman Mosley's resolution today if we move forward with it. But I'm asking us to turn that resolution into some kind of funding mechanism so we can move forward with at least 12 to 20 dash cameras. And then hopefully Captain McCosey, he's a great captain. We can get some companies out there that will hear us and reach out to us and have some pilot programs. So thank you.
Madam President, if I can just real quick, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
The costs on this is just not, and I think everybody's aware of this, it's just not the equipment and getting them installed, but it's the people to manage this, because the data storage and the management of the additional data that we're going to get, that we have to redact and everything else, is going to require additional FTEs, positions in the police department. And that's where we need to make sure we're very deliberative on doing this as quickly as possible. Absolutely. I'd like to have them in there yesterday, but we need to make sure that we have the infrastructure in terms of personnel to manage the program. Because as you all heard me say a lot of different times, our staffing is really suffering right now. But we will do our best to get this thing up and running as quickly as possible with the support of the council, of course.
Thank you so much, Chief. Councilwoman Holland?
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to echo what Councilman Kamer had to say about this, and I suspect that this is a feeling among many of my colleagues. Respectfully, I think it is a common misunderstanding in certain minds that a resolution does not make something happen, that there are distinct mechanisms within city council operations, and resolutions are something that city council does within which we raise our voices. It does not have the force or operation of creating a law or directing an action or making something occur. A resolution urges an action to occur. Another something that I think is often overlooked is that the operation of all things police department by our city charter is the domain of the mayor. So next move, as I see it, and appreciate very much the chief's proffering of the detail of what will be involved in incorporating dash cams. But the next move must, by operation of our charter, be the introduction of legislation by the administration, which will then permit council to deliberate and decide whether this is one of our best investments we could make. I fully support my colleague Councilwoman Mosley's resolution. I think that it is one of a number of things that all in our community can agree on right now. So it's a start, but respectfully, I urge all who are by city charter imbued with the power to make this happen to do so. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilwoman Mosley?
Thank you, Madam President. And thank you to my colleagues for their words. I want to touch on something that Councilwoman Holland had stated. This originally went over to the law department to be legislation. The resolution is a part of that. But as we work through the numbers and Captain McCosey does his research to find out how much this is going to cost, we were bringing in the resolution first. The legislation will come after the fact from once we come to an agreement on this, but they have to get the numbers first because for my understanding, it's going to cost a lot more than I thought. I thought it would be about $1 million. I've been told it may be a little more than that. So the resolution is for us to encourage and urge, and I thank Councilman Kamer for the support, especially as the chair of public safety. But we're getting to the point of the legislation. It was the first act, but making sure that we have all our ducks in a row, making sure that we talk to the vendors. There are a couple vendors that I have reached out to get information from that I have forwarded on to the chief and to Mike Miller and to Captain McCosey. We also already have Akron who does our body cameras, and they also do dash cameras. So they're also another entity that we are having a conversation with. So legislation is forthcoming, but there's a process that that we have to go through on the budget side of things, especially with the state requesting funds as well, that has to come before the legislation.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Malik?
Thank you, Madam President. And I agree with a lot of the comments of my colleagues. I think that, the faster that we can move towards legislation on this would be better. Obviously we want to be responsible and know exactly what the price points are involved here, because we know, to the chief's point about how expensive camera storage and operation and processes can be. Chief Milet, do you have a sense of when that information might be available about dash cams?
I'm hoping, as far as the costs,
Yes, sir.
I'm hoping by the end of this week.
Thank you. And, while Captain Mancosi is putting that together, I did also want to kind of return to one of the points that was in our Reimagining Public Safety and in the Racial Equity Task Force, which we talked about this past March during the budget, which is that our SWAT team does not currently wear body cams, and also our off-duty officers are not required to wear body cams. And that's largely due to the fact that we do not have sufficient supply of body cams, and I think also storage capability. And I know that similarly in March, Captain Mancosi and Chief Milet provided information about how much that would cost. I believe it was in the ballpark of $500,000 a year. And that is significant expense as well. So I hope that we can also, continue thinking about that, because I think all of these decisions are trade-offs, right? We have a finite amount of money and we want to be responsible in how we use it. So definitely think that dash cams add value. Definitely think that as we're looking at uses of force, that making sure our SWAT team has body cams, making sure off-duty officers have body cams, all of those things add value. When we're talking about community trust, really, I think we can't put a value on community trust at this point.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Fusco, did I see your hand? Did you still have a comment?
No, I did, but it seemed as though we've talked quite a bit about cost and about trade-offs. So I think we're covered. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Any other comments or questions at this time? All right, I want to thank the chief and Emily and the mayor for providing us with this valuable information on today. So if there's nothing else coming before this committee, meeting adjourned.
Our next committee of the day will be the Planning and Economic Development Committee, and that will begin at 1 o'clock. Those committee members are Fusco, Kamer, Connor, Baylor, and Mosley. Again, that's the Planning and Economic Development Committee. So we will end our live